And I then want to start the slideshow. Now we've lost Peter. How do I find Peter again? I really need
I can still see you.
Need a 6th grader to help me run this.
I can still see you, Matthew. Oh, there we go.
Now, the question is, can we both see Peter and the slideshow?
I can see you in the slideshow, Matthew.
Let's make Peter a bit bigger. How's that? How are we doing? Okay, let me do one more thing. Peter, I'm going to show you the people, but then I can't show you after this, okay?
I would love to see who's all there. Hello, Trinity Sacramento. Good morning. Good morning. Gosh, good to see so many of you here. Hi, hi.
There's a good crowd. Can you hear me
Yeah.
okay? Can you all hear me okay from here? I'm going to present from here so that I can advance slides. Is that okay? So, to love and to serve, liturgical space today with Dean Matthew Woodward and Dean Peter Elliot. And, oh, now because Dean Peter's so big, we can't see things. I'm going to shrink you a little bit, Peter. We've been working on a strategic plan in the last year. And it's being implemented over the next couple of years. And these forums are happening in the context of that plan. So some of our values are, our mission is to love and to serve. And everything we're doing here is to try and help us figure out how to love and to serve. We're an Episcopal community growing in faith, following Jesus and trying to live into the values we see in his story. We want to be diverse, inquisitive, unafraid, just, and prayerful. That's who we think we are, or we're trying to be. And here are our goals. There are 5 goals there, but this forum is about the 5th goal, and to some extent about the 4th goal. We want to be a center of liturgical excellence, to do our liturgy really well, but we also want to develop a master plan for our buildings and think that through. So, wanted to talk about our sanctuary and about space. I don't know if you know, but we have some deferred maintenance. And that's partly due to the fact that we thought about, at one point, knocking the whole cathedral down and completely starting again. It means that we have some things that we need to do work on. I don't know if you know, but there's a legacy heating system in the floor. It's under the pews, and the flooring itself is really kind of higgledy-piggledy and a bit of a mess. Because we didn't knock anything down, and we're not going to knock anything down, we'd like to think about making the beautiful space fit for the next 25 years. That's in the background of some of our thinking. And I would also like to seek some greater flexibility and understanding how worship needs are evolving and wanting our sanctuary to serve worship needs into the future. One of the experiences I have in the cathedral is it does one job very well, but I need it to do 3 or 4. Does that make sense? So wanting more space for our larger choir, music ministry, liturgical space, and also different styles of service that might happen from time to time. So liturgical space in the Anglican tradition. Our subject today is liturgy. Liturgical space in the Anglican tradition. I'm not going to go into this in detail because Peter is a bit more, but there are different things we do in liturgical space. Morning prayer and evensong, which most Anglican churches were designed for. But then the parish communion movement in the 20th century meant that the Eucharist became the center of our worship, and we had to rearrange churches to make that work better. Baptism and Eucharist are central in the life of the church. And the thing that I think is really important that we sometimes miss is that one of the purposes for coming together on a Sunday morning is to learn. So there has to be a teaching space in the church. The Eucharist. This is really important to me. Sometimes we think it's one big thing, but it's actually split into 2 halves. It's actually two liturgies. The liturgy of the word, which you could say is the teaching element, and the liturgy of the table, which is the sacramental element. And sometimes we do bits of the liturgy of the word from the table, and it gets a little confusing. And it's something that I try and keep clear in the way that clergy move in the space, that those are two different distinct parts of the service. So you might have noticed chairs in front of the altar. The reason for that is to have a teaching center that is not the altar, so that the liturgy of the word happens slightly separately from the altar. Oh, I just said that. And I don't think our current solution is a perfect solution. But we have a kind of a narrow liturgical space. So we put the chairs in front of the altar for the first half of the service. And I've sat in the congregation, and I quite like it, seeing the clergy sit there and kind of hold the space. But then at the offertory, we have to pick the chairs up and move them. And that's an extra job for the vergers to do. If we had a little more space, it might be nice to implement it in a slightly more elegant way. So we're going to be looking over the next few months at how we might renovate our liturgical space in some ways. And I've invited Dean Peter Elliot, the one-time Dean of Christ Church Cathedral in Vancouver, who has been through a church reordering process and has got a lot of experience about that, to come and talk to us now. And he's going to carry on working with me in the vestry as we think about some things over the next couple of weeks and months. So Dean Elliot, should I go Dean Peter, Dean Elliot? Which way should I go?
How about Peter? You know, that everybody calls me Peter, and I'm happy to be here. Shall I just carry on? So, welcome to Vancouver, British Columbia. I don't know how many of you have been here. That's a view from a helicopter, the Lionsgate Bridge. The park you see on the right is called Stanley Park, and we live just at the edge of that here. Just a little bit of background about me. I served as Dean of Christ Church Cathedral, Vancouver, British Columbia for 25 years, beginning in 1994 and retiring in 2019. And over that period of time, we did a fair bit of renovation on the church building. I've been to Trinity Cathedral, Sacramento. It was the year 2002. My husband, Thomas Roach, and I are close friends of Don and Caroline Brown, who some of you may remember. And I was on study leave at way back in 2002 as we prepared for the changing of our liturgical space. So I've been in Trinity Cathedral. I've worshiped there at the 9 o'clock, and I have some sense. And then in conversation with Matthew, with your dean, getting a bit more of a sense of what you're up to. Probably just best for me to say next slide, is because you're running the slideshow. There we go. So my purpose today is to share with you some learnings from the community journey that Christ Church Cathedral was on in reshaping liturgical space. And I should say right from the start that I think, Matthew, we're going to have another session or two open to members of the congregation on a kind of whole theology of space. So think of today as a bit of a teaser, a little bit of a commercial. There's a lot more depth and conversation that we will have in the next few weeks. So, like you, I began working at Christ Church Cathedral in 1994, as I said. There were a whole lot of issues of deferred maintenance. The whole physical plant was study in deferred maintenance, which is a nice way of saying that for too many years, we really hadn't addressed, the congregation really hadn't addressed building issues. Buildings are kind of controversial in the life of the church. We know that you can have Eucharist, you can have teaching in a home, around a dining room table, in a park, but spaces are important as well. So what began as an effort to address deferred maintenance grew into a community conversation. There were dreams and visions and hopes. I think when I was with you at Trinity Cathedral in 2002, the ideas of building a new cathedral were very much in the air. Um, and this is always part of community life. You have conversations about things, and then I believe it's God's Holy Spirit that leads us maybe going to a bit deeper. So what began as a conversation became a journey into what might be possible, a community journey into what might be possible. Like lots of journeys, you have your vision and then you try to figure out how to assemble the resources to make that possible. Sometimes it seems impossible at the beginning, but you work it through. So let's take a look. This is unlike Trinity Cathedral in Sacramento. This is an exterior view of Christ Church Cathedral, Vancouver. It was built in 1889. As you can see, I hope that it's in the heart of a very vibrant downtown. Vancouver is a metropolitan center of about 2 million people. And Christ Church Cathedral is arguably at the busiest corner in a fairly large metropolitan center right downtown. It's not big. And that's one of the things that shares. It's not a huge building. It's not like Durham Cathedral or Wells or St. Peter's Basilica or Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. It's actually quite a small building. It was designed to be a parish church. And it was designated a cathedral in 1929, and it has served as a cathedral since then. So we had done some exterior renovations, and then we did some more. This is what it looks like today. You can see, I don't know whether my cursor shows, that's actually a bell spire that, does my cursor show on the screen? I don't know whether it does or not, Matthew. Yeah, doesn't matter. It was important for us to have the entire cathedral lit, and we had to put a new roof on. You're not putting a new roof on, I don't think, are you, Matthew, at this point?
Not on the cathedral, but maybe on the
yeah, maybe on the precinct and the complex. So that was a fair bit of work. In my 25 years at Christ Church Cathedral, we spent $25 million on the church. So it was about $1 million a year if you amortize it out, but it didn't come in those chunks. And I can talk about the ways that we raised those funds in addition to growing the congregation. So that's a bit of context. That's what the exterior of the building looks like. Let's take a journey to the past. This is about in the 1940s. Gothic Revival Church. And as Matthew said, as your dean said, very much set up for morning prayer, evening prayer, and occasional Eucharist. So the altar is right up under the big window at the far end of the building, as you can see there. Pews all orderly set up really like a 747 is the way I like to think about it. And the choir at the front sitting facing each other with an organ up there. Let's go to the next slide. This is what the cathedral looked like more or less when I arrived. A previous dean had moved the altar down from the west end, liturgical west end of the church, and built a platform out, but the pews remained. It was basically the same configuration, simply bring the altar closer to the folks. If you look at the floor in that, you see that it's red. That was red linoleum. The red linoleum, Matthew was talking about floors, covered up a historic Douglas fir floor. So the next shot will show you what we transformed that into. So in the work we did, we revealed this beautiful Douglas fir floor. We kept the platform, built a new altar, and brought chairs in rather than pews. I'll say a bit more about that in a couple minutes, to gather around the altar and around the lectern, so that the community was gathered around, and the font. And let me say a few things about all of that. So that's what it looks like today. Let's go on. So the question is, what does a building say about what we're doing and who we are? Here's an important thing you could put on a t-shirt sometime. A church building is not the house of God. The people are the house of God. From 1 Peter, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy people. It is the gathered community that is the way that we experience Christ as present in word and sacrament. So a building says something about who the community is and who you want to become. You have this beautiful strategic plan, who it is you wish to be and become. How can the building give some expression to that? So we had some principles guiding us as we moved through a renovation process, which took about, I was working at it right up until I left, so it takes a long time. Three big ones. One is that we wanted our building to be welcome and accessible. I don't know whether the pictures showed, but there are a lot of ramps in the building between the two levels, perfectly integrated in a nice architectural design. And also ramps to get into the building and an elevator to get up between the two levels. We did all that because it's a heritage building and we had to go through a number of city processes. And I thought that we would make the space accessible because city code demanded it. City code in Vancouver says all spaces have to be accessible. I thought, well, we'll put these ramps in, the elevator in, but I don't think anybody will use them. Guess what? They're used all the time. People bring all sorts of conveyances to church. There's walkers, there's wheelchairs, there's families with these skookum strollers that if you want to get up and down, you really can't lift them up and down stairs. So that was it. We wanted the space to be flexible. Why? Because different occasions call for different kinds of ways to configure the space. Most everything in the cathedral can move. So since the renovation, we've been able to take the chairs all away and have banquets in the cathedral. We have a labyrinth that we can put down on the floor. We can turn the chairs all around to face other directions. We can move the altar, move the lectern. It's regularly moving around. So flexibility, and that I know Matthew was talking about as well, was a value for us. And the third principle was to turn what was really two rooms, the room where the laity sat, called the nave coming from nautical, like navy. A lot of churches look like are really upside down ships, right? And then a room, another room called the chancel, the sanctuary, where the clergy and the laity sit. People who wear vestments sit up in the choir at Trinity Cathedral in Sacramento. We wanted to transform two rooms to one room. And let me just say a bit more about one room. Why is that important? So it's one room in which clergy and people are gathered. Gathered, as Dean Matthew said, for the proclamation of the word and the Eucharistic meal, the two acts. If you'd like to think of Sunday morning liturgy as a play, you've got Act 1, which is the liturgy of the word. Then you have Act 2, which is blessing bread and wine and sharing it. And also for the baptism of new Christians. Increasingly in the church, and I know you know this because of the good teaching you've had over many years, we understand the ministers of the church not just to be the clergy, but the whole people of God, right? So it's not two rooms, one for the clergy and one for clergy servers and choir, and one for the congregations. If we can go to the next point there, it's one room, uh, one room for the whole people of God to gather. And in that one room, we can go to the next slide, there are three centers: an altar, a table where bread and wine is blessed, um, an ambo, which is a way to talk about a pulpit and a lectern in one. It's a place of proclamation, a place of teaching, as Matthew said, and a font where new Christians are baptized. So with those three centers, let's keep going along. I'll keep moving it because I know questions and conversation is the most important part of this. Those three centers, ambo, altar, font, we chose to design them at a human scale, suitable for community hearing and the common meal. As Matthew said, the altar and the lectern, the place for blessing bread and wine, the place for reading and proclaiming scripture, need to, in some ways, be balanced to each other, emphasizing, although they're two different acts, word and sacrament are one. And they need to be placed in positions which enhance audibility and sight lines. So those are some of the principles we had going in. And we spent a fair bit of time designing some new furniture. The altar, the ambo, and the font were all new creations, new pieces of furniture that we made. And we also made everything light in weight and movable. So let's go and take a look first at the font. If you go to the great cathedrals in Europe, you'll find the font is often in a separate room, quite a separate building, like in Florence or in Pisa in Italy. We don't have that kind of space in our buildings generally, so our choice was to put the font right inside the worship space so that it was always visible to the congregation gathered for Eucharist. And the congregation, where it's placed in the cathedral in Vancouver currently, you have to walk by it when you come up to receive communion. So many people dip their hands in the font and make the sign of the cross over themselves just before they receive. Here's a picture of the font that we designed. It's easily movable. We have those lovely pictures so that when we baptize someone, that was Ben, when we baptized him, three pictures pouring, three members of the Trinity, lightweight, can be moved around, can be moved into different positions of the room. Let's talk a bit about the ambo, the lectern or the pulpit. In older churches, and I don't know whether you have this in Trinity, there was a lectern where scripture was read from and a pulpit where the gospel was read from and preaching happened. Contemporary liturgy suggests that you have one place. So it's both pulpit and lectern. It's an old Latin word called ambo. A little story, I had a visiting bishop come. A bishop was preaching one Sunday, visiting from another diocese, and I was walking through the liturgy and I said, and after the gospel, you just go to the ambo and preach. And he said, Peter, I have a question for you. I said, what's that, Bishop? He said, what's an ambo? So if you've not heard that word before, you're in good company. Think of the ambo as a table for the proclamation of the word. Have a table for the Eucharist and a table, a space for the proclamation of the word. Following in the tradition of the synagogue bema. Any of you who have been to a synagogue know that when the scrolls are rolled out, they are rolled out on a fairly wide lectern type piece of furniture. And often, like at a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, the rabbi and another person stand side by side. And we chose to do that. So here's a picture of the ambo that we created at the cathedral that frontal is to, it was around November 11th, Remembrance Day, which in Canada is observed. One of the interesting things about the ambo and the altar, which you'll see in a moment, is we got so focused on accessibility, we made them possible to move higher and lower depending on the height of the person who was behind the ambo. I'm fairly tall. I had an associate who was fairly short, and we could adjust the height of the ambo and the altar depending on which one. Also, we designed them so that a person in a wheelchair could speak at them, go low enough so that or preside at the altar. Again, I thought, well, that's kind of a nice idea, but will we ever use it? When we opened the renovated cathedral, the mayor of Vancouver was there. The mayor at the time is wheelchair bound, so we could actually move, so he could speak to us. Just an interesting aspect of that. And let's talk a bit about the altar. I see our time's moving along here. One community, one altar, a sign of the unity of the people of God. Focus on the people of God gathered around the table. Why? So that we can be nurtured to go out and be the church in the world. A freestanding, movable altar that can be approached from many sides, and reading as a table. That's what it is. And here's a picture of the altar we designed at the cathedral. Again, it can go higher and lower. It's on a system. It's movable. It's usually covered with a fair linen, but you see the top of it has inlaid in it. It's a beautiful piece of furniture. The 5 crosses, which are traditional on an altar, representing the 5 wounds of Christ. Let's keep going. I'm almost done, Matthew.
Yep.
Seating. What do you do about seating? So again, what does the building say about the community? You want to find, or we wanted to find, I should say, a way to gather people around the place of proclamation, the Eucharistic table, to foster relationship between the worshipers, and to provide clear sight lines and ample room for movement and processions. We Anglicans love our processions. Then there's the question on the next slide of whether it should be pews or chairs, and that may be a conversation you had. We had it for some time. You can imagine it's always, you got your pew people, you got your chair people. People tend to think pews are traditional. They actually date from the 19th century. They're a product of the Industrial Revolution. They're not historic. The more historic cathedrals have open space entirely with some chairs. Think of Canterbury Cathedral, St. Paul's Cathedral, etc. We went for chairs because they express or give ways for us to express the values of a gathered community, which are flexibility, relationship, connection, and movement. And the next and last slide, and then I'm happy to have some conversation with you, shows how the chairs can be fit. Now you'll see in this picture, there are some pews. We did a hybrid. We kept some pews. Some people like pews. Families love pews. Kids can crawl over them. Heritage loves pews. So Matthew, that's a teaser into a longer conversation about liturgical space and what we did at the cathedral. And I'm very happy to be in conversation with you and others about what they've heard, questions they might have, and I'll respond as best I can.
Sorry.
Hi, everyone, I can see you now.
I can go back and I turned around so you can see you. I know some of you have to go to the 11 o'clock, and I get that. Actually, most of the people want to go to the 11 o'clock have already gone, but they'll get to listen to this on video later. I also do want to say this is, like Peter said, a teaser. We'd like to go into more detail on some of this conversation the morning before our annual meeting. So the Saturday morning before the annual meeting, Peter's going to come and join us on a Zoom video like this. He's going to spend an hour and a half getting into this in more detail, having a bit of a longer conversation. But I just wondered, with that short presentation, if anybody had questions or comments or things they wanted to know right now. And I see a question over there from our Deacon Emeritus.
Peter, I appreciate that Christ Church back, well, some years back in my history, and
Matthew, could you take the microphone down so I can hear better? Thanks.
My husband is Canadian and we worship at Christ Church when we visit. And I noticed that on the side chapel there, to the left as you're facing the altar, there's an Indigenous presence there, formations presence. But I had on the Sundays we visited. I was wondering if you try to incorporate things around multiculturalism in the architecture or the setting.
Yeah, very much so. The questions about Indigenous motifs and representation in the architecture and the design. Yes, in Canada, First Nations people and the relationship with settler church, the legacy of colonization, and we had residential schools and so forth, have made for an awkward relationship between Indigenous communities and churches. So we sought in many ways to honor First Peoples, always in conversation with them, never wanting to appropriate their symbols and traditions, but always in conversation. And it was always a deepening conversation. I don't know where you are in Trinity Sacramento in relationship to that particular dialogue. It's an important one. And it's a long journey of conversation, reconciliation, and healing in the Canadian Church. I hope I'm responding to the question.
I think you are, and I want to say, Tina led us in a big process of developing land acknowledgement, which we've used, but we're trying to figure out what the next steps are so that we can live into the implications of a land acknowledgement on this space and reflect continually on the colonial forces that shape the Episcopal Church, which are complex.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question. Lynette, did I see you have a hand up?
I was wondering if there's any room for saving some of the beautiful woodwork that might hear this afternoon.
Yeah, if there's any space to save the wood.
Yeah, but there was a name added in there, which I want you to hear about, Peter. Harry Kazakian, who's a historic member of the Life of the Cathedral, the father of Elizabeth Keneally, who is our current head verger, built lots of the wooden things in church, like built the current font that we use. Well, we actually have two fonts. So we realize we have one in the transept, which we never use because nobody can see it. And then we have the one we put out front, which Harry built. He also built, I think, other bits of furniture. The bishop's chair, the lectern, I think, I'm not sure, but we'll check with Elizabeth on that. What do you think about retaining things even in new forms?
Yeah, there's a lot of in Vancouver, I can't speak to exactly context, but in Vancouver, as we renovated, we were able, working closely because it's a heritage building, with the heritage advocates and so forth, to maintain and treasure many of the historic pieces of furniture in the building while bringing in some new furniture as well. There's a church in Vancouver where we worked to consult as they did liturgical change as well. They did a very interesting thing, which was they had these beautiful oak pews. It was a church that could seat about 300. There's now about 60 people worshiping on a Sunday, and they went for chairs. They wanted to know what to do with the pews, and so they had them made into a new floor. So the church now has this gorgeous oak floor, which is really quite spectacular, constructed from wood that formerly was the pews. So I think there is both honoring the heritage and some of the historic features of Trinity Cathedral and finding a way to incorporate them in a new design and repurposing some things for other uses. Sensitively done. I hope that responds to the question.
I think so. I'm going to ask a question, if you don't mind, which is more like a teaser for the next conversation in a way. But Peter, the use of space in the church has changed over the last couple of centuries. We do different things now in worship. Do you imagine that we're going to keep on changing the way we do things? And also, can you pick one major thing out that changed the way that space is used in church in the last couple of centuries that you might pick out as a highlight?
Well, yes, in terms of the first part of the question is, do I think, if I'm hearing you right, I'm getting a little bit of echo, so I'm doing my best. Do I think that the church is going to continue the way that the people of God gather is going to continue to change and transform as we move into the future? Absolutely. I think, the image I always have of the people of God is like the children of Israel on a journey. And as we move into the future, it's important to bring with us, I'm thinking of the verse from, I think it's Matthew's gospel, not you, but the St. Matthew's gospel, Matthew, where Jesus says, the kingdom of God is like a householder who brought out of his treasure things that are old and things that are new. Things that are old and things that are new. And it's this dialogue between things that are old and things that are new that is important. In terms of changes over the last 100 or so years, I think for Anglicans, Episcopalians, the biggest change really has been the assertion of the Eucharist as the principal act of worship on a Sunday morning. Most of our churches were designed, I grew up, I'm old, in a time where I grew up an Anglican, I'm a cradle Anglican. The Sundays, you had 2 Sundays that were morning prayer in the morning as the principal service, and 2 Sundays that were Eucharist. I don't know whether others of you had that similar kind of experience. In the liturgical renewal movement in the late 60s to early 80s, centrality, the people of God gathered on a Sunday, we break bread and share wine. Why? Jesus didn't give many commandments. He said, told us to love each other, to wash each other's feet, to break bread and share wine and remember him. And so we do that on a regular basis. And because of that change, the way we order our buildings, the way we gather has changed.
One of my reflections is that in the buildings that were built before the 1960s, a lot of them reflect a different space metaphor than buildings that were built after the 1960s because of that liturgical change that Peter's highlighting. When it was the choir that was the focus of the front of the morning and evening prayer, lots of church spaces are very rectilinear, they're very face to front and kind of watch what's going on. The metaphor after the 1960s was like, can we gather around the table and eat together? And sometimes when you have a church built before the 1960s and then you're trying to make it make sense post-1960s, it takes a little time and effort. And they really did implementation of that here at the cathedral by bringing the altar forward from the wall, but they put it so far forward and made some compromises and kind of kept both of its metaphor, if that makes sense. Like long, straight, and narrow, also let's gather around the table, but not quite. And so that's what we did in the 80s in order to solve some of these problems. And there's an ongoing conversation about that. But I saw some of the hands up and not okay. But go on.
So in your reorganization of the space, did you also provide for those who prefer to kneel and receive the Eucharist?
The question about kneeling to receive communion.
Right.
And I think it's a question about altar rails.
Yes. And I'll talk more about altar rails and so forth when we do some when I meet with you next time. We struggled with that. Our decision at the end of the day, there are kneelers, kneeling cushions, beautifully embroidered by members of the diocese, that are available every Sunday for people who wish to kneel for personal prayer. But we chose to remove the communion rails, and everyone stands to receive communion. That was the decision we made. I've worked with other congregations who come up with some kind of hybrid way. For those who wish to kneel, there's places to kneel. For those who wish to stand, there's places to stand. Again, mobility issues and aging congregations. For some people, kneeling is very important in terms of their devotional life. We honor that. For some folks, kneeling is important, and as the ravages of age catch up with us, it's less comfortable, and so standing gets to be more comfortable for folks. So, direct answer to your question, at Christ Church Cathedral in Vancouver, currently there is no provision for kneeling. I've worked with other congregations who are doing liturgical change, some of whom have chosen to have a space for kneeling and a space for standing. Very Anglican solution.
Very Anglican solution to do all of it. I do want to say two things about that. One, we have a further implementation of the cathedral. You can stand, you can kneel, or we'll bring it to you because you can't get to the front. And that's another important part of like recognizing accessibility and allowing everybody in the cathedral. The other thing that I'm really mindful around altar rails is they have a primary purpose, which is so that you can kneel to receive communion. They have a secondary impact, which is to create a barrier. And the question is, how do you balance both of those things? How do you make accessibility work and also give people space to feel if they wish to do so devotionally? And I appreciate you saying that you work with places that have done all sorts of things. So thank you. Question here.
In what way are you able to work with the space to accommodate various ages, particularly youth, being engaged with the space liturgically?
It's a question about children and youth being able to engage.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So one of the things I didn't mention is prior to the renovation at the Cathedral in Vancouver, the choir was in the front. Part of our renovations was building a new organ, which is in the back of the cathedral, and a choir loft there. That opened up that whole space, the chancel space, the way it has been used is that's where kids gather. So they're actually gathering behind the altar. We have soft, quiet toys up there and places to sit. And the kids, rather than being shuffled off to the side, are actually kind of right where everything is happening, have their own communion station up there and that sort of thing. Another fun thing, I think, for kids that the flexible space allowed us to do is because we're a diocesan cathedral, they had a sleepover every Monday, Thursday evening with kids, teenagers from all over the diocese who came. I didn't really know what went on all evening. I think that's probably just as well. The youth worker did things, but kids were sleeping up in the church. And then on Good Friday, because of the flexible space, they opened it all up and did different stations for kids to learn about Good Friday, about Jesus' crucifixion, and to reflect on what that meant for them. And then we could turn the church around and have a big liturgy on Good Friday afternoon and evening.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Anna and back to you.
I just wanted to comment on your interior space. I really overwhelmed with the wood. I think it's wood. And
it's wood.
Yeah, and the height of the ceilings and the colors, because to me that is awe-inspiring. And it doesn't,
yeah.
I mean, matters, but if I were to walk into that space, just walk in, I would just feel like I was outdoors, almost. I mean, which is really.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that was more of a comment than a question. Okay. Thank you.
There's the whole aesthetic of beauty. Can I just sort of, one of the things that draws us to the divine is beautiful spaces. And when you're renovating, as you are imagining Trinity Cathedral, don't be shy about wanting to make it beautiful space, because that feeling uplifted, drawn into the majesty of God's creation and the beauty of human ingenuity and artistry is a spiritual principle, and it enables people to draw closer to God.
Yes, I wanted to reinforce the fact that your redesign exposed the beams in the ceiling. That's like traditional English barn at that point. And I don't know if they could actually do that here. They would require raising the roof, I guess, at this point. But the other I wanted to mention was the elimination of what you find in a lot of English cathedrals, the rood screen, which I find rather off-putting even by the name rood, which says that what goes on beyond everything from the rood people behind there at this point. I experienced that sort of thing at All Saints Pasadena, where they incorporated the rood screens in some of the extra design at this point. And I think that incorporating them somewhere else is a useful thing. It's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, thanks for that. Two comments. One is, there were so many ways that the church found to separate clergy and laity. You know, fences, screens, this idea that what was happening. I mean, I grew up where the priests presided with their back to the congregation, and you didn't see anything, right? And the liturgical renewal movement has sought to remove the screens, remove the fences, bring the altar closer to the people, gather the people around. The mystery of what is happening is so simple. We're holding bread, we're breaking it, we're drinking wine, and when we do that, God is present to us in Christ. And then one thing about the ceiling in Christchurch Cathedral, that was a revelation. In the 1950s, they covered that beautiful cedar ceiling with basically drywall. It was the reason was acoustics. They didn't think it worked very well. So in some of those earlier slides, you can see the ceiling is all white. It was also the apocryphal story, if I may go on just for another second, is that the cedar ceiling developed a lot of soot in it. And there used to be a parade downtown on Labor Day every year that began with a cannon going off. So the story, I don't know whether it's true, but it's a great story, is that one Labor Day Saturday, there's going to be a wedding in the cathedral in the afternoon. They set off this sort of big explosion cannon to sort of start the parade, and all the dust from the ceiling that had accumulated because of the vibration came down on the pews and on the floor, and the altar guild had to spend all day cleaning up the dust for the bride and groom coming in. So that's when they put the white up. When we took it off, and it was a huge and very expensive job, they actually took each of the cedar pieces off and turned it around and refinished it and all that sort of stuff. And now it is just staggeringly beautiful. Just staggeringly beautiful. And British Columbia, we're all about wood, right?
Sorry, I missed the last bit.
Sorry, British Columbia forestry is a major part of our economy and life here. And so wood is very important.
And I want to say something about the root screens, but I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say I could talk for 45 minutes about this, so like another time maybe. Rood is the Anglo-Saxon word for cross, R-O-O-D, not R-U-D-E. The root string is crosses, and the cross was often the thing that was placed above the entrance to the sanctuary. The idea theologically is if Jesus died for our sins, the cross is the thing that allows us to head from everyday life into the sanctuary. Actually, our metaphors have changed around all of that, and we think we're all sanctified all the time. Not that we just get sanctified in the middle of the service when we go to receive communion. We don't need to be to go through a gate in order to get there because Jesus died for our sins. But I quite like the idea of the cross being one of the symbols and signs of our faith. Transfiguration, where I was, they had a rood, but it wasn't a screen. What they had was a cross just suspended from the ceiling, just hanging above the space. And it sort of suggested one of the ideas in some of the metaphors of space that are being developed now, which is we gather around the table rather than being on the outside looking in. Does that make sense? So like there's something in the center that we gather around as opposed to the barrier that we have to pass through. So we actually have a rood screen at the cathedral here, but it's not located in the historic location between the nave and the sanctuary. It's located between the narthex and the nave. So that's actually a thing that happened in some churches. Rood screens in place at the entrance of the church, partly suggesting a different metaphor. The moment you enter church, you're already sanctified, already holy in some way. But as Peter's saying, many churches have completely removed rood screens and those barriers. And I can go on about that forever, but I'm going to. Tina.
I can add one more thing about my experience at Christ. Years back, I remember attending a performance of God's Bell that happened inside the church. So that space was opened up. I was there during, my husband and I were there for the 2010 Olympics when Vancouver hosted the Olympics. And the cathedral was opened up as a special place of prayer, and they opened up their portals. And in those years, Wi-Fi wasn't so easily available. And so people were constantly in the church charging phones and that. So that what I noticed about Christ Church is that it's really engaged in the life of the city.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The 2010 Olympics was a kind of high water mark for Vancouver. And the cathedral was it is in the downtown and right in the hub of activity. And so just to your point, it was very, very important for us to keep the cathedral open. We kept it open 12 hours a day for the entire Olympiad, having liturgies every day, having Lord's Prayer said on the hour, providing hospitality. And my point being, it was an occasion, there were many others, where we sought to have the cathedral be a gathering place for the community, not just for Anglicans who like to worship on Sunday. If you get my point there, right? I think of churches and cathedrals particularly as indoor parks. They common space, a public space for people to be inspired, to have a space to reflect, and to draw closer to God in whatever way that is for them. There is a large Muslim community in Vancouver, and there have been times where I've seen on a Friday particularly, Muslims come into the church with their prayer mats and they say their prayers because it's a sacred space and they know they're welcome.
Thank you, Peter. I do just want to say we have a building tech team that is doing some thinking about both the sanctuary but also the office space. One of the challenges we have at Trinity Cathedral is a mixture of accessibility and openness and security and safety. And we are trying to figure out how to balance that. I would love the cathedral to be more open than it currently is, and at the same time safe and secure. And balancing that is the challenge. and we're thinking about it. We're thinking about not just the sanctuary itself, but thinking about this whole office suite across here and how people can gain access to the cathedral and its programs, how we can be a place where people can experience love and service all week long, not just on a Sunday. And also it's still in our midtown location, stay safe and well. So that's a challenge we're wrestling with. Let me pause though for a moment and say thank you to Dean Peter Elliot for coming and speaking to us. We've thinned out a bit, but there must have been like 75 people here at the beginning, and hopefully you'll be able to watch the video later. May I say thank you to Dean Peter on your behalf?
Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. How was this conversation? How was this go? Thumbs up, thumbs neutral, thumbs down, double thumbs up. I've got a double thumbs up. That's great. This is the beginning of a series of conversations that are going to include larger and smaller groups, depending on how we go. The next one is going to be the 24th of February on a Saturday morning, purposefully the day before our annual meeting, because this is an important part of our ongoing conversation about the life of the cathedral. We've developed a strategic plan. We've developed a desire to improve our buildings. We've decided we're not knocking them down and rebuilding them. So we have to make some decisions about exactly how we're going to move forward. And so we like another deeper conversation than this. It'll be about an hour and a half. It's going to be with Dean Peter on Zoom again, joining us from Vancouver. And then we'll plan next steps after we've done that. It will be some of the same material we've looked at today, but hopefully getting more deeply into some of the
more depth.
And thinking about how that impacts Trinity Cathedral itself here. So I'm going to put that in the e-news this coming week. If you want to put save the date, it's going to be a big parish weekend. The annual meeting on the Sunday, like a consultation about space on the Saturday, and interested parties are welcome to join us. I would like it to be where we're all in the same place at the same time as we possibly can. Dean Peter's going to join us via Zoom electronically, but I'm not kind of making that super hybrid. I'm still kind of thinking about that. Sometimes it's easy if you're all in the same place at the same time to have a conversation. It's a little more complex and nuanced. Does that make sense? So I'd love us to gather together, even though we'll bring Dean Peter in electronically. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with us, Peter?
God bless you all, and away we go to the last day of the NFL. I know some people actually watch football in the United States of America, and I look forward to continuing to engage with you over the next little while. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you, Peter. God bless.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Is there any other time set?
That would be for the convenience to tell you, wouldn't it? What would I do? We're scheduling from 10 a.m. to 11:30. 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m.